See how far you've fallen. It's already too late. The damage is done. The story has already been written. You're just standing there, reading the wreckage like a map you can't fold back together. That night? It didn't start out different from any other night. Just a little laughter. A little wine. A little too much comfort in a house that had been empty for way too long. But looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way the air seemed heavier that night. The way the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric. The way I laughed a little too hard at a joke that wasn't that funny. The way his eyes held mine a second longer than they should have. Tiny things. Innocent things. Things you could explain away if you wanted to. And oh, I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the truth? Sometimes, the heart recognizes danger faster than the mind does. Sometimes, your soul knows before you're willing to admit it. And deep down, I think part of me knew. I just didn't want to see it. Because seeing it meant admitting how empty I had become inside. And when someone finally looks at you like you're not invisible, when someone finally sees you, it's easy to forget every rule you ever swore you'd never break. It's easy to lose yourself. And once you do, there's no going back. There's just the story you'll have to live with. The story you'll have to tell yourself to sleep at night. The story you'll carry, even when you pretend you've moved on. This is mine. And if you're still here, if you've ever found yourself standing at the edge of a moment you couldn't take back, then maybe this story isn't just mine anymore. Maybe it's ours. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, because here, we don't just tell stories. We unfold the pieces of the human heart, the beautiful ones, and the broken ones. You won't want to miss what comes next. I guess to understand how everything unraveled, you have to know a little more about who I was before that night. Before the storm, before the mistakes, before the aching silence that still follows me like a shadow. I was just a woman. A woman in her early 40s, living a life that, from the outside, looked picture perfect. A house with a white fence. A husband with a good job. A son growing up strong and smart. Photos lined the walls, vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, frozen smiles under glass. If you walked through my front door, you would have thought, now this is a happy home. But the thing about pictures is, they only capture a moment. Not the spaces in between. Not the empty dinners where I sat alone at the table, picking at cold food while the clock ticked louder than any conversation. Not the nights when the bed felt like an ocean between me and the man I used to dream about. Not the way the house echoed with memories, but very little laughter anymore. My husband. God, I loved him once. Maybe a part of me still does, in a way that's more habit than passion now. He wasn't a bad man. He was just gone. Not physically. He still came home every night late, tired, drained from the weight of a life he no longer seemed excited to live. He'd kiss me on the forehead sometimes, like I was some old friend he was fond of. He'd ask about my day, but his eyes would be somewhere else, usually on his phone, or the evening news, or the endless scroll of work emails he never seemed to escape. It's a strange kind of loneliness, being next to someone, but feeling like you're 1,000 miles apart. And then there was my son, 17, the light of my life, even when he frustrated me to no end. There was a time he'd come running to me with everything, scraped knees, broken hearts, school dramas. Lately, though, he'd grown quieter, closed off, still loving, still kind, but guarded, the way boys get when they start believing the world needs them to be men. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself it was normal. That pulling away was part of growing up. But deep down, it just felt like another door closing. Another room I wasn't allowed into anymore. And that's where Ethan comes in. Ethan was my son's best friend. He was the boy every mother secretly hopes her son will befriend. Polite. Well-spoken. The kind of kid who says thank you without being reminded. He had this easy charm about him, the kind that made you lower your guard without even realizing it. He'd been coming around our house for years. Movie nights, video games, Sleepovers. I used to bake extra cookies when I knew he'd be over, just because his smile when he thanked me made the kitchen feel a little warmer. He was like a second son to me, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. But lately, there was something different. Something subtle. A look here and there. A kind of awareness that hadn't been there before. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing you could point to and say, that was wrong. Just an energy. A spark. The kind of thing you notice only when you're aching for it. The kind of thing you pretend not to see, because admitting it would mean admitting how hollow you've become inside. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was just my lonely mind playing tricks. That he was just being kind, respectful, the way he always had been. And maybe if I had believed that a little harder. If I had fought that tiny flutter in my chest with more conviction. Maybe this would be a different story. But some things, once you feel them, once they awaken inside you, you can't pretend they aren't there. Our home, it used to be full of noise. Laughter bouncing off the walls. Video games blaring from the living room. Arguments over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Late-night talks curled up on the couch. But now, the laughter had faded into memories. The pictures on the walls stayed smiling, even as the people who posed for them slowly drifted apart. There was a stillness in the house now. Not peaceful, not comforting. A heavy, aching kind of silence. It wrapped itself around me at night, when the lights were off and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. It sat beside me at the dinner table when I ate alone and stared at an empty chair. It followed me into my dreams, where I woke up reaching for something, someone. I couldn't quite name. That's the world I was living in when it happened. That's the world Ethan stepped into. And looking back, maybe I was already a little broken before he ever looked at me that way. Maybe I was already lost, long before I took that first step off the edge. Maybe part of me was waiting for a reason to fall. It happened on a Friday night. Nothing special. Nothing different. Just one of those evenings where the day melts into the next without warning. My son had invited a few friends over, same as always, and Ethan was among them. They sprawled across the living room, tossing popcorn at each other, arguing over what movie to watch, filling the house with a noise that I realized I had missed more than I cared to admit. I stayed mostly in the background, letting them have their fun. Popping in to bring more snacks, laughing quietly at their jokes, feeling for a brief moment like maybe life was still normal. Still bright and full and easy, the way it used to be. By midnight, one by one, the boys disappeared to the guest rooms and pull-out couches upstairs. My son was the first to vanish, mumbling something about being exhausted. Another boy followed, yawning so wide I thought he might split in two. And then it was just me and Ethan left, lingering in the dim light of the living room, surrounded by half-empty soda cans, crumpled napkins, and the fading echoes of laughter. I remember feeling it then. The shift. So small, so easy to ignore if you really wanted to. But it was there. I started gathering up the mess, stacking plates and glasses into a precarious pile in my arms. He stood up to help me, flashing that boyish smile that had always been so harmless, until it wasn't. And when we both reached for the same plate, our hands brushed. It was nothing. It was everything. A spark, so quick and subtle, it might have been my imagination, if not for the way my breath caught in my chest. I glanced up at him, just instinct, just habit, and found him looking at me. Not the way a boy looks at a friend's mom. Not with politeness. Not with casual friendliness. But with a kind of stillness. A kind of awareness that rooted me to the spot. We stood there, frozen, for a second too long. A heartbeat suspended in the air between us. The world outside seemed to blur and muffle. All I could hear was the pounding in my own ears. Then he smiled, a soft, almost shy smile, and said it. "You look really beautiful tonight." Just like that. So simple. So dangerous. I laughed. Too loud. Too fast. The sound of it cracked in the air, brittle and false. I shoved the plate into the stack, turned away quickly, muttering something stupid about how I looked a mess after a long day. Something safe. Something that might make this moment vanish if I just ignored it hard enough. But inside, something stirred. Something I hadn't felt in years. Not just flattery. Not just a passing compliment. It was something deeper. Something older. Something I thought I had buried under years of responsibilities and routines and loneliness. It was being seen. Really seen. Not as a wife. Not as a mother. Not as a woman fading into the background of her own life. But as a woman. Whole. Alive. Desired. I tried to brush it off. Tried to file it away under harmless teenage awkwardness. Tried to convince myself that he didn't mean it. That I was reading too much into it because of my own aching, hollow heart. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, some part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be wanted, it whispered something I didn't want to hear. And if I had listened to the wiser parts of myself, if I had trusted that flicker of fear that bloomed in my chest, maybe I would have sent him home right then. Maybe I would have smiled politely, closed the door, and never opened it again. Maybe, but I didn't. I told myself it was nothing. That I was being ridiculous. That nothing had changed. That nothing would happen. I told myself a lot of things that night. And every one of them was a lie. All night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. About those words. You look really beautiful tonight. I kept telling myself it was nothing. That I was being foolish. That he was just being polite, sweet even, the way young men sometimes are without realizing how their words can land. But it didn't feel innocent. Not to me. And that scared me more than anything. I kept replaying the moment over and over again in my head. The way he had looked at me. The way his voice had softened when he said it. The way something in me had stirred, something I thought had been long dead. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my husband snore beside me. The sound was so familiar. So ordinary. So crushing. I turned over, pulling the covers tighter around me like they could somehow shield me from the guilt seeping into my bones. He's just a boy, I whispered to myself. He's my son's friend. This isn't anything. It can't be anything but loneliness. Loneliness has a way of wrapping around you like a second skin. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It just sits quietly in the corner of the room, waiting. Waiting for a moment when you're too tired, too worn down, too hollow to fight it off anymore. I thought about how long it had been since someone really saw me. Not just glanced past me on the way to the fridge. Not just grunted a greeting over the glow of a phone screen. But really looked at me. Like I mattered. Like I was still alive under all the layers of routine and disappointment. It's innocent, I told myself again. He's just being sweet. He probably didn't mean it that way. I was reading too much into it. Let it go. Let it go. But no matter how many times I told myself to forget it, the words stayed, floating around in my mind, brushing against the places that had been starved for attention for far too long. You look really beautiful tonight. It wasn't even the words themselves. It was the way they had made me feel. The way they cracked something open inside me that I had tried so hard to keep buried. A part of me wanted to slap myself. To scream at myself for even noticing. For even letting my mind wander for a second toward anything more than a harmless compliment. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, was hungry. Hungry for connection. Hungry for warmth. Hungry to be seen. And that hunger, it's a dangerous thing. It makes you rationalize. It makes you excuse. It makes you forget who you are and remember only who you used to be. I told myself it was just one moment. One flicker in an otherwise ordinary night. Nothing more. But deep down I knew. I knew a seed had been planted. And seeds have a way of growing. Especially when they find themselves in the cracks of a lonely heart. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. That easy smile. Those eyes that held me a little too long. I hated myself for it. I hated how easy it was to slip into the fantasy, even just for a second. And yet, even as the sun started to rise and the guilt weighed heavier and heavier on my chest, a tiny part of me, a part one didn't want to admit even existed, was already wondering what would happen if we ever found ourselves alone together again. If I had any sense, I would have kept my distance. I would have built walls so high he could never climb over them. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because part of me didn't want to. And part of me was already waiting for the next moment. But that wasn't the last time our paths would cross that way. It was only the beginning. The days that followed felt strange. Off balance. Like I was walking on a tightrope I hadn't meant to step onto, too far from solid ground to turn back now. At first, I tried to tell myself nothing had changed. I tried to believe that one strange night didn't mean anything, but I could feel it. In the way my heart quickened when I heard the doorbell ring. In the way my hands fumbled a little when I opened it and found him standing there, smiling like nothing in the world had shifted, even though everything had. Ethan started coming over more often after that night. Little things, harmless things at first. He'd swing by after practice, claiming he had forgotten something at our house. He'd offer to help me carry groceries from the car. He'd linger in the kitchen after my son had wandered off upstairs, casually leaning against the counter, talking to me about school or his plans after graduation. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That it was all innocent. That I was reading too much into the way his eyes sometimes softened when he looked at me. The way his laughter seemed to linger in the air a little longer when I was the one who made him smile. But the signs kept coming. Small, almost imperceptible shifts that only stood out because deep down, I was already looking for them. He started complimenting me. Not in big, dramatic ways. Not in ways you could easily point to and say, this isn't appropriate. Little things. I like your hair like that. That color looks really good on you. You should smile more. You have a beautiful smile. Each compliment was like a tiny pebble dropped into a still pond. Ripples that spread wider than I wanted them to, stirring up feelings I had no business feeling. Every time he said something, I would laugh it off, shrug it away, pretend it meant nothing. But the truth is, it meant everything. It meant too much. And then there were the goodbyes. At first, they were quick. A casual wave, a mumbled "see you later." But slowly, they grew longer. He'd hover by the door, shifting his weight, like he had more to say but didn't know how. His hugs, once quick and friendly, started lasting just a little bit longer. His hand would brush against my back, lingering just a fraction too long, setting my skin on fire with a simple touch. I should have stopped it. I should have set a boundary. I should have said something. Anything. But I didn't, because some part of me, the lonely, aching part, didn't want it to stop. Not yet. And then came the rainy afternoon. The one I wish I could erase. The one I still dream about even now. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. I had errands to run, groceries to buy, a million little things on my list. The boys were supposed to be at the mall, killing time the way teenagers do. I was supposed to be alone. But plans change. They always do. Ethan showed up at the door, soaked to the bone, dripping water onto the welcome mat. His car had broken down a few blocks away, he said. Could he wait inside until someone could pick him up? I hesitated. Just for a second. But a second was all it took. Of course, I said. Come in. Let me get you a towel. It felt innocent. It felt like the right thing to do. How could I turn him away into the pouring rain? I handed him a towel, laughing awkwardly at how ridiculous he looked, hair plastered to his forehead, sneakers squelching with every step. He laughed too, the sound warm and easy, filling the empty house with something I hadn't heard in far too long. I made coffee, more out of habit than anything else. And we sat at the kitchen table, steam rising between us, rain hammering against the windows like 1,000 tiny drums. The conversation started light. School. Plans for the summer. Funny stories about mutual friends. But somewhere along the way, it shifted. The laughter softened. The words slowed. The distance between us seemed to shrink without either of us moving an inch. He asked me questions. Real questions. The kind I hadn't been asked in years. Was I happy? Did I ever wish for something more? I laughed them off at first, trying to keep the walls up, trying to stay safe behind my familiar defenses. But the walls were already crumbling. And the truth, the ugly, aching truth, spilled out easier than I expected. I told him about the loneliness, about feeling invisible, about missing the person I used to be. He listened, really listened, leaning in, eyes locked on mine, like every word I said mattered. And then, when I made some silly joke to hide the way my voice had cracked, he reached across the table and touched my hand. Just a light touch, a brush of fingers against my knuckles, but it felt like the world stopped spinning for a second. I should have pulled away. I should have made some excuse. I should have remembered who I was, what I was risking. But I didn't move. Neither did he. His voice was soft when he spoke. So soft, I almost didn't hear him over the rain. Can I just hold you for a minute? You look like you need it. 1 minute. That's all he asked for. Just a minute. I should have said no. God, I know that now. But back then, I wasn't thinking clearly. Or maybe I was thinking too clearly. Maybe that was the problem. Because the truth is, I needed to be held. Desperately. Hopelessly. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not my marriage. Not the years between us. Not the consequences waiting just beyond the next heartbeat. Only the empty spaces inside me and the boy sitting across from me, offering to fill them. I nodded. Barely. Just the smallest movement. But it was enough. He stood up first. Walked around the table. And before I could second-guess myself, before I could pull the words back into my mouth, he wrapped his arms around me. Tightly. Warmly. Not the polite hug you give a family friend. Not the quick, casual squeeze of familiarity. No. This was something different. Something full. Something desperate. I stiffened at first, my body frozen with the weight of what was happening. But then, something inside me cracked wide open. It had been so long since someone held me like I was precious. So long since someone touched me without expectation, without impatience, without indifference. I closed my eyes. I let myself meld into it. Just for a moment. Just to remember what it felt like to be needed. Wanted. Alive. The rain kept tapping at the windows. The house stayed impossibly still. It was just us suspended in that quiet, forbidden moment. And then, he moved. Gently. Carefully. Almost reverently. He pressed his lips to my hair. Just a soft kiss. Barely there. Like he was asking a question without speaking it aloud. I should have pulled away then. God, I should have. Every alarm inside me was screaming. But I didn't move. I was drowning in the warmth. In the ache. In the simple, brutal truth of being seen. His lips found my temple next. A tender, lingering kiss. Not demanding. Not forceful. Just offering. And that's when I pulled back. Heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might tear itself free. Confused. Guilty. Scared out of my mind. What are you doing? What are you thinking? I looked up at him, trying to find the right words, the right way to untangle what we had just done. But before I could speak, he whispered, I can make you feel alive again. If you let me. Simple. Soft. Deadly. Because in that moment, it wasn't just temptation standing in front of me. It was every lonely night. Every empty glance from my husband. Every birthday spent waiting for flowers that never came. Every part of me that had been starving, hollowed out by years of being needed but never wanted. I was torn wide open. Between the woman I had promised to be and the woman I had become when no one was looking. Between the life I had built and the life I dreamed about when the lights were off and no one could hear me cry. I should have said no. I should have gathered whatever dignity I had left, told him to leave, slammed the door shut on whatever madness was trying to take root between us. But I didn't, because when you're starving, even a crumb looks like a feast. And he was offering me more than crumbs. He was offering something I didn't even realize I had forgotten how to want. I made a choice that day. A choice I can never take back. And it changed everything. Stay with me. You'll want to hear how everything unraveled after that night. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Because sometimes, the heart doesn't break all at once. Sometimes, it shatters slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but the truth you can't outrun. The morning after was the hardest. The sun came up like it always does, indifferent to the wreckage it lit up. I woke up feeling like someone else entirely. Like my body was the same, but my soul had been scrambled overnight, pieces missing that I couldn't get back. The weight of what I had done pressed down on me so heavy, I could barely breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet, willing myself not to cry, willing myself to hold it together for just one more minute, one more breath. My husband stirred beside me, mumbling something incoherent before rolling over and falling back into sleep. He didn't know. Of course he didn't. And somehow that made it worse. I slipped out of the room, moving like a ghost down the hallway. I made coffee I couldn't drink. I folded laundry I couldn't focus on. I smiled when my son came downstairs, acting like everything was fine, acting like the world hadn't shifted under my feet. And then my phone buzzed. A simple notification. A message from Ethan. Last night was amazing. No punctuation. No hesitation. Just those 4 words, as casual as if he were talking about a good movie or a winning game. My stomach turned over so violently I thought I might throw up. I stared at the message for a long time, the words burning into my eyes, into my skin, into the parts of me that already felt raw and exposed. I deleted it without responding. Deleted it like that could somehow erase what had happened. Like that could make me clean again. Untouched. But it was too late for that. Too late for pretending. All day, I moved through the house like a stranger. Folding clothes. Washing dishes. Answering questions with empty smiles. Pretending like everything was normal when inside, nothing was. I could barely look at my son. Every time I caught his face, every time he smiled at me or asked me a simple question, guilt slammed into me so hard it left me dizzy. He had no idea. None. Blissfully unaware that the woman he trusted most had already betrayed him in a way he could never forgive. And my husband. He noticed something. Not enough to suspect. Not enough to ask. Just little glances over his newspaper, a slight frown when he caught me staring off into space too long. A question in his eyes he never bothered to voice out loud. "You're acting distant," I could hear him thinking. But he never said it. Maybe he didn't really want to know. Maybe he'd gotten so used to the distance between us that a few more inches didn't seem worth mentioning. It would have been easier if Ethan had stayed away after that night. If he had let things fade, let me pull myself back together. Let me at least pretend we could move past it. But he didn't. He kept showing up, finding reasons to swing by after school. Asking if my son was home, even when he knew he wasn't. Offering to help with little things, carrying in groceries, fixing the leaky faucet, grabbing the mail. At first, I made excuses. I told him I was busy, that it wasn't a good time, that maybe he should check with my son first before coming over. But he was persistent. Charming. That same easy smile, that same warmth that had once felt so harmless and now felt so dangerous. Worse yet, my son noticed. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he laughed and said, "Man, Ethan's been acting weird lately. Like, I don't know, weird around you." I dropped the plate I was holding. It shattered against the floor, the sound so loud it made us both jump. I laughed it off, muttering something about being clumsy, about being tired. But my hands were shaking as I cleaned up the pieces. Small cracks. They were starting to show. Hairline fractures running through everything I had built. Everything I was trying so desperately to keep intact. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something gave way. Before one of those cracks split wide open, swallowing everything whole. But I wasn't ready to face that yet. I wasn't ready to admit that the house of cards I was living in had already started to fall. So I did what I had always done. I smiled. I played along. I told myself I could still fix it, even as the ground trembled beneath my feet. Was it love? Was it weakness? I still don't know. I wish I could sit here and tell you it was one or the other. That it was clean. Simple. Easy to box up and label. But it wasn't. It was messy. Ugly. It was hunger dressed up as tenderness. Loneliness wearing the mask of connection. And the worst part? I welcomed it. I clung to it, even as it burned me from the inside out. The shame settled over me like a second skin. Thick. Suffocating. Every look from my son felt like a silent accusation. Every smile, every casual joke, every "thanks, Mom" cut into me like a blade he didn't even know he was holding. If he ever found out. No. I couldn't even let myself go there. At night, lying beside my husband, the bed felt colder than ever. The silence between us was no longer just comfortable indifference. It was a weight. A reminder. Every breath he took in peaceful sleep felt like another betrayal, not his, but mine. Mine alone. I would stare up at the ceiling for hours, my mind racing in circles. Torn between wanting to confess, to scream it out and let the pieces fall where they may, and wanting to bury it so deep inside me that even I would forget it ever happened. And then there was Ethan. God, Ethan. I kept asking myself, did he really care? Was there anything real in the way he touched me, the way he looked at me, the way he whispered promises into my ear? Or was I just a thrill to him? A secret he could tuck away, brag about in the dark corners of his mind? I thought back to the way he smiled at me. How easy it was for him. How quickly he bounced back to normal, like nothing had shifted, like nothing sacred had been broken. And maybe that was the answer right there. Maybe it had meant something different to both of us. Maybe I had woven a story around it, wrapped it up in feelings and longing and need, while for him, it was just another story. Another adventure. Another notch. And worst of all, the part that still keeps me awake even now, was this gnawing, ugly thought I couldn't silence. Maybe I deserved it. Maybe I deserved the loneliness that had wrapped its arms around me for all those years. Maybe I had made my choices too early. Trusted too easily, loved too deeply, and this was the price. Maybe the years of being overlooked and taken for granted, the years of soft smiles that never reached his eyes, the years of hearing, "I'm busy," instead of "I love you." Maybe they hollowed me out until there was nothing left but need. And when someone finally offered me a drink after all that time wandering the desert, how could I say no? But deep down I knew. It wasn't about Ethan. Not really. It wasn't about my husband. Not entirely. It was about me. The parts of me I had abandoned. The parts of me I had silenced. The parts of me that still ached to be seen, to be wanted, to be loved in a way that felt impossible inside the life I had chosen. Sometimes, the prison isn't the secrets we keep from others. It's the ones we keep from ourselves. The ones we wrap up in beautiful lies and justifications. The ones we feed and nurture when no one else is looking. The ones that whisper to us when the house is dark and the world is quiet and there's no one left to lie to but ourselves. And once you realize you're locked inside, once you see the bars you built with your own two hands, it's already too late. You're trapped. With no one to blame but the person staring back at you in the mirror. Have you ever found yourself doing something? Not because you wanted to, but because you didn't know how to say no to your own loneliness? Have you ever crossed a line you never thought you would, not out of passion, not out of rebellion, but out of something quieter, something colder, something desperate? I keep asking